7 weeks ago, Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein of California surprised everyone when she basically just threw up her hand and said, what the heck? And she made an individual decision that she would unilaterally release a transcript of 10 hours of Senate testimony from the founder of research firm Fusion GPS, Glenn Simpson. That decision by Feinstein led to all sorts of congressional fighting about all sorts of things, both substantive and otherwise. But there was an immediate shock factor that day that the transcript was surprisingly released. There was an immediate shock factor from one quick line very late in the day in Simpson's testimony. It was a line that was actually uttered by his lawyer. Quote, question, earlier you talked about evaluating the credibility of the information in the memoranda that you were being provided by Mr. Steele. You talked about your belief that he was credible. Did you take any steps to try to assess the credibility of his unnamed sources in the material he was providing to you? Answer by Mr. Simpson, yes, but I'm not going to get into sourcing information. Question, so without getting into naming the sources or anything like that, what steps did you take to try to verify their credibility? Answer, Mr. Simpson, I'm going to decline to answer that question. Question, why? Answer, not by Glenn Simpson. Answer by Simpson's lawyer. Quote, this is a voluntary interview. And in addition to that, he wants to be very careful to protect his sources. Somebody has already been killed as a result of the publication of this dossier, and no harm should come to anybody related to this honest work. Somebody has already been killed. That was 9 hours into 10 hours of testimony from August. That was the transcript that was released to the public in January, thanks to Dianne Feinstein. Well, now here's Jane Mayer tonight at The New Yorker. Quote, in Russia, there were rumors of a more primitive kind of justice taking place. During Glenn Simpson's testimony to the Senate Judiciary Committee, his lawyer asserted that somebody's already been killed as a result of the publication of this dossier. Mayer continues, who that could be has been the subject of much media speculation. One possibility that has been mentioned is Oleg Erovinkin, a former FSB officer and top aide to Igor Sechin, the president of Russian oil giant Rosneft. On December 26, 2016, in fact, Erovinkin was found dead in his car. No official cause of death has been cited. But, Jane Mayer continues, quote, no evidence has emerged that Oleg Erovinkin was a source for Christopher Steele. And in fact, Special Counsel Mueller is believed to be investigating a different death that is possibly related to the dossier. A different death. Jane Mayer, you are making me crazy. Joining us now is Jane Mayer from The New Yorker magazine. Jane, congratulations on this scoop. It is killing me.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you.
So I have a few different, there's obviously a lot here, a lot of new material, a lot of stuff nobody else has reported, and I want to ask you about a bunch of it. Let me start with the reporting about the memo from Steele that was not released by BuzzFeed. That was after his Fusion GPS contract ended. It was produced in late November after the election in 2016, and it was based on a Russian source suggesting that that the Kremlin had had a hand in casting the U.S. Secretary of State for the Trump administration. What else can you tell us about that reporting and its credibility?
Well, you know, it's hard to evaluate. It's only based on one source. It's a shorter memo than most of the Steele memos that created the dossier. But one of the things, I mean, you know, on its face, it seems fantastical that something like this could be true, that a foreign power would intervene with an elected president by then, which Trump was, and shape the foreign policy of our country. But one of the things that seemed suspicious and kind of backs it up to some extent is that the circumstances of what happened with Romney, which was this very long, it was a prolonged process of him being interviewed for Secretary of State. It seemed to go on and on. It was kind of humiliating. He was sort of dragged through dinners and the limelight and interviews, and it was just odd. And then in the end of it, Trump decided not to pick him, and very quickly, and as a big surprise, turned to Tillerson instead. So, I mean, you know, hard to know. I mean, one of the things that I think we're going to find with much of what's in the Steele dossier, first of all, it's looking better and better every day, more and more credible. But I think it's going to take somebody like Mueller, who's got subpoena power, to be able to really nail down a lot of the things that you need to know. somebody who can take a look at all kinds of other kinds of intelligence, and so that's what it's probably going to take.
And you do have reporting on some potential new territory for the Mueller investigation, if in fact, as you report, he's looking at a death that is related to the dossier that isn't the much discussed aide to Igor Sechin, who turned up dead in his car the day after Christmas, the month after our election. Can you tell us anything further about that?
Well, you know, one of the things that I thought was a really interesting point that was made by a former very top CIA official who I interviewed, who's an expert in the area of Russia, and he said, you know, apropos of President Trump has said this is all fake news. He said, fake news doesn't produce real deaths, and there were real repercussions from this dossier, it seems, and including somebody who may have been killed, and quite a few other things that happened to potential sources that we think may have been Steele sources in Russia.
Does that explain some of the state of mind that that you describe in terms of Steele feeling potentially that his life might have been in danger, or that he needed to take steps to protect himself in addition to his sources?
I think it explains why he has been so careful about not speaking. His lawyers have told him not to talk to the press, and he's had to be very, very careful about his life, his family's life, but also about his sources. I mean, these are people he's worked with for many years. They didn't just come out of the woodwork for this one task, which was to do this investigation of Trump. These are people who've worked with him for all kinds of assignments on many other cases as well. And interestingly, his sources and sub-sources, many of them were known to the FBI, because Steele's worked with the FBI over the years on a number of cases. And the FBI had a lot of confidence in both him and in these sources, his network.
Jane, if you don't mind sticking around for a second, there's one other matter that I'm sort of desperate to ask you about. It's something I've been wondering about since the campaign, since we found out that the Clinton campaign was paying at one point for Steele's investigation. Why didn't they then use this material during the campaign?
Question.
You've got very good reporting on that. Do you mind sticking around to talk to us about that in just a second?
No, happy.
All right, Jane Mayer from The New Yorker stays with us. We'll be right back.